Welcome. We are talking today about a very important real estate topic, rental investment topic. We're talking about the ongoing rental period, managing rental properties, and specifically we're going to talk today about the process of rental collection. Understanding that it's a process, what's going on in the background, and the things that are important for you as investors, as owners, to be aware when working with property management or with your tenants if you're doing it yourselves. So, Stephanie, can you please explain to us what are the steps when we talk about rent collection? It might say, well, I'm getting the money and that's it. But can you explain the different types of rental collection and the process that revolves around it?
Absolutely. So a majority of our tenants, there are a few exceptions. Rent is due on the 1st, considered late on the 5th. They have different formats of being able to pay rent. They can pay online with a fee. They can make payments by personal check, money order, or cashier's check, either mail it in or bring it in directly to the office. There are a few different platforms that they can use. But ultimately, it's considered late on the 5th, and if the tenant has not called to say why it is that they're going to be late and let us know a date as to when it's going to be paid, 3-day notice is issued, which gives the tenant then 3 days to contact the office and make right their rent payment along with any late fees or 3-day notice fees. If for whatever reason those 3 days go by, then we have to turn it over to our legal department to start the eviction proceedings. Things have been kind of tricky lately with COVID. There have been a lot of exceptions. There's a lot of assistance going on out there right now, so we have been waiting a little while longer to get the rents, but ultimately we have been getting them. But you know, even in the craziest of times with people not having their jobs or finding it difficult to pay rent, we're still kind of in a percentage of collecting rent that's acceptable,
Yeah. And honestly, if I'm looking on another topic, and we'll get to it, like what we thought will happen when COVID started and where we are now, it's completely different, and we will talk about it. But I want to go a moment backwards to where you started and talk about the rental collection process. Okay, so it's the 1st of the month, and obviously most of the time, and with most of the tenants, we're just getting the rental incoming. And what I want to really provide as a tip for any person that considering working with property management is having a solid system with an owner's portal. Obviously it means on the other end there is a tenant portal, which makes it easy to the tenant to pay rent. And we want to make it easy for the tenant to pay rent. So that's, I think, the first important observation for us choosing a property management. We want to make sure they're working with systems and making the tenant's life easier with several platforms to pay rent. Now, the second thing that you've mentioned is that one of the platforms is actually allowing them to pay with checks. So how is this process working?
With personal checks?
Yeah.
Ultimately, they just make the check out and bring it in. But, there's times that there are people who don't manage their money well and checks can be sent back from the bank, not sufficient. There are fees for that. Once that happens one time, they're no longer allowed to use personal checks as a way to make their rent payments. Mm-hmm. So then they're only able to make cashier's check or money order payments from that point on.
Okay, so that's great, and I think with that we're going to the next milestone of rent collection process, which is like the 6th or the time frame where it is the deadline for tenants to make their rental payments. Many times, and I'm telling you from my experience working with hundreds of properties, I'm getting like a frequently asked question from investors. Hey, here I got an update from property management, and they see a photo like with the yellow stamp on the door that you put out, like if the tenant is not paying the rent. So the important thing to know, and I think you mentioned that, it's not like an automatic process that on the 6th or on the 9th you will put it, and it's important for you to be aware. trying to work with the tenant, looking like what was the history of the tenant, and trying to see what it is. So it's not like necessarily like the first, the sixth, and the ninth, right?
Correct.
Can you talk a bit about your work? Like, why are you doing it? Why is it important? And what kind of things you are looking for when you say, okay, this is a tenant, I'm going to check what is happening and try to work with him until you decide, okay, we're going to put the stamp and escalate the process forward.
Yes. So for me, especially, recently with COVID going on, I would love to give people the benefit of the doubt. If their history is good and they haven't caused, issues and they take care of the property well, those are people that we want to try our best to work with and keep around. People fall on hard times sometimes, right? And I've been one of those people. So not to the point that it's going to get an investor, in a jam, but, we have payment arrangements. So if a 3-day notice is delivered, they can make that payment arrangement, and if that person does not make the payment on the day that they say they're going to make it, we can then turn it over immediately. So it's not like we're putting anybody in a bad position. We're just trying to allow the investor to get their money, the tenant to have a roof over their head, and kind of save some paperwork. Like we're not looking to kick people out, especially in the world we're living in today. We want to take care of the investor first, obviously, and second, the tenant, and it's just time to play
if I interject, and I want to put perspective into for the investors, in my experience, like this kind of process of working with tenants, I don't want to, put a specific percentage, but 80 to 90% of the times, it's getting resolved. 80 to 90% of the time, we're working with the tenants.
Yes.
So that's something I think for the investors, give your property management, assuming you selected a quality professional property management, give property management the month to utilize working with the tenant. And anyway, by the end of the month, when you get the report, you see a rental balance. It means the property management had the 30 days period to work with the tenant, and that's a natural good escalation time point. And property management, anyway, policy-wise, at this time stage, like it's 30 days, if it wasn't happening before, now the 30-day stage, it would be the escalation towards the eviction or termination process, correct?
Correct, and that's a major question that we get. So the 7th or 8th hits in my emails, I have investors asking me, why didn't the tenant pay rent, and my response is gently letting them know, like, let us handle this for you. 90, like you said, 80 to 90% of the time it fixes itself within, a week or two, So if you just allow us to do the job that you hired us for, we can.
I can tell you, and I think it's really a tip. Seasoned investors, people who have big portfolios, I think they know that. But sometimes for investors that are just beginning and it's the first property, then they want to make sure they are on things and they don't miss. And I think this is something where you can get an observation and say, okay, I'm going to work with the property management, so I'm going to let them do their work, and I'm going to save my time and my efforts doing what I wanted to do. Don't be the manager, but do governance. So the recommended governance time point would be when you review your monthly reports. You see there is a rental balance, escalate. That's what I would give as a tip. There is no one right way to do it, but this is the way I would recommend working with property management. If it's not working for you, well, maybe you should question property management, but you should give this time to work with the tenant, and again, most of the time it works well. Now, I want to talk about this kind of time period, and it happens, sometimes we try to work with tenants, and most of the time they collaborate, and sometimes they don't collaborate. I think it's important for investors and buyers to understand, communication is happening, efforts to collect are happening, but, eventually tenant can decide that he is not communicating or not paying, and then there is the escalation. So can you explain, okay, you tried working with the tenant and it's not going, either they don't want to or they just can't, circumstances of life, they can't. How do you escalate the process forward?
Ultimately, whatever notices have been delivered, Together, the communications on the portal, which to me are extremely important because it shows, whether or not they've said they're going to do something that they have not followed through on or haven't said anything at all. That speaks volumes in court. So ultimately I get all of the documents together, I send them over to our attorney who then files it for an eviction and we await a court date.
Yeah, so for you to know what basically our sincere efforts and property management sincere efforts have weight if we need to escalate, and that's important, and why you are working very systematically in documenting. In terms of the time that it gets from when we file for eviction, it could be like to terminate the tenancy, and it could be just eviction for non-rental payment, depends on the case. Usually, at least in Cleveland area and the counties we are working here, it's like rough about
5 or 6 weeks.
5 to 6 weeks when you get a court date, right?
Yes.
And now we have the court date, and usually how much time or what happens once there is the court date and there is the court decision, what happens then and what are the timelines, roughly?
Each city is different. They all have different stipulations. Some cities you have to hold the belongings of the tenant for up to 30 days. Which, ultimately we don't really like to see because there's storage fees, we tend to talk the owners into allowing the belongings to stay in the property while we worked around them due to saving money for storage and, saving time for the contractors to be able to do some of the work while the belongings stay there. But once they're put out, if they don't leave on their own on the date given in court, we then have to order a bailiff to come, and we have a contractor go along with them to secure the property, change the locks. And again, it all depends on what city it is. If they vacated on their own, great. We have to see what the condition of the property is and kind of go from there.
Okay, so before we talk about the move out or the walkthrough, you mentioned something very important that I want investors to know. We are now talking about the process in its entirety. Most of the times, there is the court decision with the eviction, and tenants will evict. The bailiff happens if they do not comply with the court decision and then do not evict. Can you explain what a bailiff is, what it means, what is actually happening? Who is going to the property from what? From the sheriff?
Yes.
Who is coming and what is actually happening? What is a bailiff?
So the bailiff is an officer from the sheriff's department who they go to the property and they are basically the ones to get the people to leave the property while our contractor changes the locks so that they no longer have access to the property. It's almost a forceful move out. Unfortunately, we try not to get to that point, but some people either don't have anywhere to go or they don't want to leave, so it gets to that point sometimes.
Yeah, what I want to give as an highlight, and I think it's important for you as investors to understand this process, when you are selecting investment areas, there are states, and I can tell it from my experience working in different states in the US, there are states that we could say they are more landlord friendly, and there are states that might be more tenant or renter friendly. And in Ohio State, it is more landlord friendly with the process you've learned right now. But as an investor, you need to do your homework and check how it goes in different states because regulations are per state. And specifically, what I want to highlight is that the fact that we have this kind of a landlord-friendly process, I think, in my experience, it reduces the probability that we are getting tenants throughout all of this process because they know what expects them. So practically, we do not get many evictions really reaching to that final bailiff point, right?
Right.
But it's still good that this is the process. The tenants are aware and it has its impact.
Yeah. I think this year, my first one just happened. So, it's not a goal of ours to evict people, but when we get to that position,
yes,
that's what we have to do.
Yes.
There are two, I want to just throw this out there are fees that go along with that,
yes,
so that they're not surprised by that. In a a world of utopia. The tenants are taking care of, their bills and the things that are coming through from the attorney's office or the courts or what have you. But if they're not paying their rent, they're most likely not going to pay those fees either. It will normally come from security deposit of the tenant, or I don't know if you want to get into secondary cause, but there's also, outside of Shoreway, there is a secondary cause, which you can then go after the tenant for any damages or unpaid fine, fees, any unpaid balance, whatever. So that's a whole other process that we can maybe talk about if you wanted to, but ultimately just know there are fees that go along with it. It's not inexpensive, but that's just something that I like to let them know too.
We have videos. I encourage you to really watch our series of videos, and we have a separate video that is actually talking about secondary causes. Like after all of this process, we have the tenant out, great, we are practical, let's get the next tenant, let's make the property working back again. But in certain cases, when the tenant have left a certain damage or central unpaid rental balance, which is extensive, we can go to the secondary cause process. It's like a legal process, and we're explaining it with the legal people in a separate video, and would love to give you more information about that. So regarding the rent collection, Stephanie, I want to thank you. And if you have more questions regarding rent collection, eviction process, how all of this stuff is working, you can write here in the comments, and we would love to give you the answers. And if you enjoy our materials and you find them helpful, please do like and share. We're really making a lot of efforts to give you practical information, free, no-cost material. So we hope it gives you value, and we really hope to see you also working with us, and in any way having a lot of success in your investment opportunities and in your investment in general. Thank you.
Thank you.